The challenge of retirement. If you're aching to retire, I have some bad news for you. You have a challenge ahead of you. You may never be able to retire, at least not with the income you enjoy now while you're working. And this is especially true if you are using the same methods to retire that our parents used, relying on pension, profit sharing, RRSPs, and 401k plans. These government-qualified retirement plans provide temporary tax benefits, but they're also the reason most people will never be able to stop working for money. Here is how the basic government-qualified retirement plan works. You and/or your employer, as allowed or directed by the government, decide how much you put into the plan each year. Under a typical plan, you're not taxed on the income you put into the plan. This has the same effect as if you received the income and then received a deduction for putting it into the plan. In fact, some plans work just this way, like a standard IRA in the United States or an RRSP in Canada. The money in your plan is then invested in some type of government-approved asset. Most governments require you to decide between mutual funds or an account that earns interest, called a guaranteed contract. If you have a self-managed or self-directed account, you have more options for your investment and you have more control over where the money is invested. Your money stays in the retirement account until you retire. At that point, you are allowed to take some or all of the money out. When you do take the money out, the government taxes you at ordinary income tax rates. The effect of this is to postpone or defer the tax on this income and the related earnings until you retire. The argument for this type of program is that this gives you a way to save for retirement without the added burden of paying taxes on the earnings of your retirement investments until you retire. When you retire, as the argument goes, you will be in a lower tax bracket because you won't need as much income, as your expenses will be lower. There are some important exceptions to the general rule that government-qualified retirement plans postpone your tax. In the United States, if you put your money into a Roth IRA or Roth 401k, you don't get a deduction when you put your money into the plan and you don't pay tax when you take it out. In Australia, you don't pay tax when you or your employer puts money into your superannuation account. The account pays tax on the earnings and you don't pay tax when you take the money out of the account. Most tax planning in the United States and around the rest of the world is focused on maximizing the amount you can put into these types of accounts. The idea being that the more you put in, the less you pay now, and the more money you earn tax deferred. If you're like most people, you've been told your entire working life to maximize your 401k or RRSP. You may even work for an employer that adds some of the company's money to the money you choose to put into the plan. This is commonly referred to as a matching contribution from your employer. The retirement plan lie. This all sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Don't pay tax until later and get a tax deduction today. You may even be expecting me to show you how to increase the amount you can put into your retirement account. That's not going to happen, not in this book or in any other book I author or to which I contribute. I'm not going to tell you how to maximize the amount you put into these so-called retirement plans that are the creation of your country's government and are qualified by that government. In my mind, this would be unconscionable. Instead, I'm going to tell you everything that's wrong with these plans and why you shouldn't use them. Then, in the next several chapters, I'm going to tell you how to permanently reduce your taxes by actively investing in any of the 4 asset classes: business, real estate, stocks, and commodities, instead of investing in a government-qualified retirement plan. Let's begin with the lie contained within their basic premise of these retirement plans. They presume that when you retire, you will be in a lower tax bracket than you are when you are working. The only way this could possibly be true is if your goal is to retire poor. If you plan on retiring with even the same amount of income you have while you are working, you will be in a higher tax bracket when you retire. Retirement equals higher tax bracket. The reason for this is that while you are working, you can take advantage of a whole host of tax benefits. Let's start with the deduction you get for your children. When you retire, your children are no longer dependent on you, if you're lucky, so you don't have that tax benefit. While you are working, you probably pay interest on a home mortgage. When you retire, you hopefully have paid off your mortgage, so you no longer have that deduction. While you are working, you likely have business deductions or employment-related deductions. These obviously go away when you retire. There are people who say that the fact these deductions go away is precisely why you don't need as much income when you retire as you do while you are working. The point being that you don't have to pay for kids, a mortgage, and business expenses when retired. That may be true if you plan to just sit around the house and watch television when you retire. If you're like most people, however, you've put off a lot of life's pleasures while you were working in hopes to enjoy them in retirement. These pleasures may simply be more rounds of golf or more travel. Or you may have always wanted a house in the mountains or on the beach. These are additional expenses that you didn't have when you were working. Plus, you'll probably have all of those cute grandchildren that need to be spoiled. And these days, you may also have to contribute to the income of your children who are struggling to make ends meet. So you really do need at least as much money when you retire as you do while you are working, if you're hoping to have any quality standard of living. You just don't get all of the tax deductions you had while you were working. This doesn't even take into account the effects of inflation on your tax bracket. You may be earning $100,000 now as a couple and be in a fairly low tax bracket. But by the time you retire, you may need $200,000 of income to maintain your current lifestyle. Tax brackets rarely keep pace with real inflation, so you could find yourself in a much higher tax bracket just from inflation. Government restrictions. The worst part of any government-qualified retirement plan is the amount of control you have to give up. The term qualified implies that you have to meet certain restrictions for the plan to be qualified for tax benefits from the government. Let's start with the investment restrictions. Only certain types of investments are allowed. In an IRA, you can't own collectibles, such as paintings, musical instruments, or collectible gold and silver coins. In a 401k, you are severely restricted on the types of investments you can make. We already talked about the restrictions on leverage, but we were only talking about the bank's restrictions. What about the government restrictions? The primary benefit of a government-qualified retirement plan is that normally the plan doesn't have to pay tax on its earnings. You don't pay tax on the earnings until you pull the money out of the plan. However, in the United States, when you leverage your investments inside your retirement plan, the income earned inside the plan is taxed when it's earned. You lose the tax-deferred benefit of the qualified plan. So even if the stock brokerage will give you leverage, your retirement plan ends up paying tax on the earnings because of the leverage. Then there are the restrictions on how much you can put into the account and when you can take it out. In Canada and Australia, these restrictions are fairly liberal, and you can put in quite a bit and have some good flexibility for taking the money out. Not so in the United States. In the United States, money you put into a 401k plan cannot be withdrawn until you leave your company. There is an exception that allows you to borrow out 50% of the money you have in your 401k, but even this exception is only allowed on one loan at a time, and most employers only allow you to take out a loan once every few years. There are also restrictions on when you can have full access to your money. As I mentioned before, in most countries, you are restricted on when you can take the money out without a substantial penalty. Control or lack of it is the worst part of government-qualified retirement plans. Even in Australia, where the self-managed super is pretty amazing, the regulations about how to manage your super are in excess of 3,000 pages. You even have to get your super audited by a professional accountant every year. That's great for us accountants who get paid to do the audits and understand the regulations, but it's a huge additional cost for you. So you end up with several challenges when you use a government-qualified plan for retirement. First, you increase your tax rates. Second, you increase your risks, since you are leaving your money in the hands of someone else. Third, you reduce your overall returns because you are limited in using leverage. And fourth, you lose control over what you can do with your money and when you can use it. For the entire chapter, I've told you what not to do to prepare for retirement. In the next several chapters, I'm going to tell you what you can do without being subject to massive government control over your money. We're going to talk about how to use business, real estate, stocks and bonds, and commodities such as gold and silver to prepare for retirement and take advantage of the tax incentives provided for each of these asset classes. But first, let's look at the key points of this chapter. Number 1, using retirement methods your parents used only provide temporary tax benefits. Number 2, placing a tax shelter investment inside another tax shelter investment creates a tax liability. Number 3, you lose control of your money when investing in government qualified plans for retirement. Tax strategy number 17, use a Roth IRA for certain wealth strategies. The only type of tax planning I like is planning that permanently reduces taxes. This is my biggest challenge with most government qualified retirement plans. While most government qualified plans are horrible for permanent tax savings, there are certain government qualified plans that do work. In the United States, these plans are called Roth IRAs and Roth 401ks. I don't love Roth 401ks because there are still too many restrictions on them regarding investment options and distributions from them. But Roth IRAs can be a very good part of a tax strategy, provided that the type of investments that work in a Roth are also the types of investments that are part of your wealth strategy. Most people invest without any strategy at all. At Provision, we always suggest you begin your tax planning by forming your wealth strategy. And one of the first steps in a wealth strategy is determining which types of assets you are going to use to build your wealth. We recommend that you focus on a single type of asset. Begin with the asset class you are going to use, whether business, real estate, paper, or commodities. Once you have the asset class figured out, choose which type of investment you want to use within that asset class. For example, if you choose paper assets, then decide which type of paper assets you're going to use to build your wealth. Are you going to use stocks, options, futures contracts, or maybe hard money loans? Once you have decided on the asset you are going to use for building wealth, then you can decide how to get the best tax benefits from using that asset. As we discussed earlier in this chapter, if you choose multifamily housing as your asset, then you won't want to use a government qualified retirement plan to hold your wealth. That would be putting a tax shelter inside another tax shelter. There are several assets that work well in a government qualified plan, particularly a Roth IRA that provides permanent tax savings. These assets all have certain things in common. First, they don't use debt for leverage. Second, their tax rate when invested outside of a government qualified plan is fairly high. And third, they produce income that you will not need or want until you reach 59 and a half years old. Finally, all you have to do to manage these assets is to direct the purchase and sale of the assets. So be sure to build your wealth strategy before you decide on your tax strategy.